Hey everybody, what's going on? So we're gonna talk about a camera today that I didn't think I was gonna get in my hands so soon. But a few days before Chinese New Year here in Singapore, I got a call from Sony Singapore and they said, Bobby, would you like to try the Alpha 1? We can only give you 5 days during the holidays, but would you like to try it? Of course I'm gonna say yes. So here it is, the all new Sony Alpha 1 or A1, however you wanna call it, with a series of lenses. Let's talk about it. Now, before we get into things, I do want to thank Sony Singapore for helping me with this. Having said that, these are my thoughts and my thoughts only. They did not pay or sponsor us for this video. I did leave my initial thoughts in various forum groups on Facebook and online, but my overall thoughts are here in this video. Let's talk about the design on this. I think for like a lot of you out there, I was hoping that Sony would update the design, especially with the Alpha 1 or the A1, however you want to call it. And, you know, when you're hearing all these specs in the presentation, then when they unveil the camera photo, you're like, oh, Sony, why didn't you kind of do something different? Because this design has been out there for a number of years. The reason being is that this is a pro camera. The price point, the feature set, it's a pro camera. And pros that are used to using the A9, the A9 II, or the A7R4, or A7R3 for that matter, they are used to a specific button set on a camera. They're used to how it holds and how to use it. And to relearn a camera system, especially when your livelihood depends on it, especially if you're capturing fast action for, let's say, the Olympics or sporting events, political, events for that matter, or whatever it may be, where your livelihood is capturing that shot, you don't want to miss it because you're fiddling with buttons because the camera is new. I think this is why we've seen, like, for example, Canon and Nikon, they really stick to the same body design in their D series and 1DX series, for that matter, because for that reason alone. So I can understand why Sony did it with this camera system, but the consumer side of me wishes that it was a little bit different. And it is. I mean, obviously you do have your high frame rate dial here, and of course your various different focusing dial here, which is really well put together. It's all locked. You're not gonna knock this on accident. It's been well thought of. I mean, you will notice that the camera feels a little bit heftier than, let's say, the A7R4, which I have with me, by the way, but it's only slight. Probably the average person won't notice a difference. Moving to the back of this, of course, we do have that display that everybody was hoping was going to be a flip-out rotatable display. It is not. It is just the standard flip-up. That's it. Doesn't even flip to the side if you want to go in portrait mode. This is the basic of basics. This has been in Sony cameras for a number of years. Of course, it's touch-enabled, so there's a little bit difference to that in terms of the menu system. But yeah, and it's only 1.4 million dots, so it's not the highest resolution display. However, I understand why Sony did that, because once you go to the EVF, everything changes. You got a 9.44 million dot EVF in this thing. The highest resolution EVF out there, of course, the same as the A7S III. But you're going to go up to 240 frames per second. That's a high refresh mode. I mean, that's like what gamers use, for example, on some of their displays. So you're essentially getting that optical viewfinder quality, but it has an EVF. It is beautiful, and it's a 0.90 magnification, so it's very big when you look at it. Whereas other cameras are usually 0.72, 0.8, something thereabouts. This is 0.90, so you're almost getting a 1-to-1 ratio on it, which is fantastic. I applaud this, and actually, I understand why Sony then had to make a choice. Do you go EVF, high resolution, higher frame rate, which is gonna take more battery, or do you go with the display? And because this camera is designed to be used with the EVF the majority of the time, in my personal opinion, and you don't want to kill the battery life on this camera, especially when you go to 30 frames per second, you gotta have to make some sacrifices. So I think they stuck with the basic monitor for referencing, for your menu, but if you really want a pixel peep, use the EVF to see your images, and you'll really see the quality out of that versus the display, which is just more there for reference than anything else. Let's talk about battery life for a second on this. I don't know the exact shots. You can look on the website for their secret rating on it, but I can say that if you are trying to max out the speed of this camera along with video, you can get through a day with this camera on a battery, but I would recommend getting two. I recommend getting the battery grip anyway, because it's just, I like battery grips, and it just gives you that peace of mind that you're not gonna run out. But I would notice that I would start off the day around 10 o'clock. I went to the zoo. I went to the bird park. Big thanks to the Singapore Zoo and the Jurong Bird Park here for their hospitality on this. But I started around 10 a.m. And by 3 to 4 p.m., and this is after shooting thousands of shots, I was down to about 50+% on the battery. So which is not bad because I was keeping in the high plus frame rate mode the entire time. But if you are in a profession where you're gonna need this for a number of shots, even more advanced or more strenuous, you're gonna have to really push this camera to its limits, definitely get the battery grip and you'll get a second battery. But that's essentially the Alpha 1. I mean, it's got all the same ports you saw in the A7S III, full-size HDMI port on it. You got your USB-C, which you can charge on it, your headphone jacks, the variety of different ports here. If you want your, got micro USB as well. I mean, you're really covered in this regard on this camera system. You've even got an Ethernet port here. So this is designed for the pro user. Consumers will buy this camera because they want the best of the best, but it has all the ports, all the functionality, the Wi-Fi, all that connectivity for the pro photographer out there that needs to get their images to their editors to publish immediately. That's what this camera is designed to do. Now, let's talk about the internals. Let's talk about what's inside. So I'm not gonna go through every single spec of this camera system because there is a lot inside of this body. Plus there's a website that tells you everything about it. But I'll highlight some of the things that stood out to me. First off, this sensor. This is a stacked BSI 50 megapixel CMOS sensor that is Sony's creme de la creme. I have never seen a 50 megapixel sensor perform like this in any camera, full frame camera mind you, out currently. There's nothing out there like this in terms of speed, in terms of all the things that this sensor can bring. This is phenomenal. Then of course we got dual processors inside of this camera system as well. The speed out of this with your autofocusing, you thought the A9 II was fast? Oh, you are in for a treat. You are in for a treat. When I was watching the promo video like you guys, I thought that was all just, you know, someone having some fun with the graphics and just saying, okay, yeah, it's not gonna really perform like that. Oh, it does. That box around the eye just sticks on like it's, I don't know, like a special effect. It's crazy how good this thing is and how responsive it is. Then we get into up to 30 frames per second. Now there's an asterisk to that because there's a lot depending on that, the type of lens that you're using, your settings inside the camera, all these things which we'll talk about in terms of usage in just a bit. Dual CF Express Type A cards, along with the UHS 2 cards in there if you want to opt for that, but go for the CF Express. Honestly speaking, the UHS 2 cards are there as their backup. But the CF Express Type A cards are what this camera needs to perform at its maximum. But I'll talk about those cards later on in terms of usability because there's pros and cons to those cards. What else, man? Honestly, it's what everybody's saying. It's 3 cameras in one without compromise. I have got essentially an A7R4, not 61 megapixels, but 50, with better low light performance in this camera system. I've got a camera system faster than the A9 II, up to 30 frames per second, 50 megapixels. The A9 II is 24. This is 50 and it's faster, or as fast in some regards. Then you have the specs that match or beat the A7S III. You got 8K in this thing and 16-bit raw recording externally. HQ doesn't have a kitchen sink anymore. It's in this camera system. They have to find another way to get their drinks and food. It's all in here. Sony gave us a camera that I've never seen on the market before. I thought the R5 was it. Guys, this camera is the deal. Anyway, let's talk about what it's like to use. So to talk about what this camera is like to use, we got to talk about one thing that I didn't mention in terms of features inside of this camera, and I wanted to wait for this because it was really important, is the electronic shutter. Now with the A9 and the A9 II, Sony really redefined what you could do with an electronic shutter inside of a camera system. And with the Alpha 1, they've pushed the boundaries again. There is no warping, there is no banding, there is no odd shapes when you're capturing fast motion. It performs like a mechanical shutter, but it speeds that blow your mind. And one thing I realized is when Sony announced this camera, because we're used to thinking about mechanical shutter first and foremost, and then the electronic shutter only if and when we need it. But this camera is meant to be shot with the electronic shutter for the majority of the time. I mean, I would say you would use the mechanical shutter if you want a faster frame rate in terms of, you know, flash photography, because you can go up to 1/400 for flash now. With the electronic shutter, you can use flash as well, 1/200, which is quite amazing to actually be able to use an electronic shutter for flash photography. Now, I didn't get to test that, of course, because I had limited time and I didn't have access to a studio because of the holiday season here. But through everything I was doing over this past few days, and I took thousands of shots, it was all with the electronic shutter. And as you can see through some of the sample shots throughout this video, they're beautiful. There is no odd shapes. There is no warping. There is nothing. Even under various different lighting conditions, you can fine tune the shutter to compensate for that flickering that you might get with tungsten lights or, or artificial lighting sources. So this camera, people want to compare it to the camera systems out there. But when you talk about the electronic shutter, there's nothing out there that competes with this. I would say this is about 1.5 to 2 years ahead of everybody else out there. Now, maybe someone will come out with an electronic shutter that'll blow our minds, or a global shutter camera system. But I've only seen that in RED cameras thus far. I haven't seen it in a photography camera. But this is as close as we're getting to a global shutter in 2021. And a photography camera is in this. Now, let's talk about speed for a moment, because one of the big things that Sony's touting is up to 30 frames per second. Now, I wanted to talk about this because through my testing, I never was actually hitting up to 30 frames. It was 25, 26, 22, depending on the lens. And the lens is a big factor in this. Now, there have been some other reviews out there in the market that really have, comparing it to other cameras. And I don't want to do that here because this is still pre-production firmware as far as I'm concerned. Until it's out in a retail shop, this is pre-production firmware, and that's what Sony told me as well. Even though it's pretty much final, close to final, there always can be a little bit of adjustments before it releases. Anyway, in terms of its speed, it depends on the lenses. Now, if you're using the 70 to 200 or the 24 to 70 or the 85 1.4, these are older GM lenses. And while there are updates to them, they're not designed to maximize the speed of this camera system. Now, I got the 135 1.8 on this, been using this quite a bit, and the 100 to 400 GM lens, which I used for, I would say, 80% of the shots that I've taken over the past few days, because I wanted to test animal tracking and bird tracking and all that fun stuff. Those lenses perform beautifully on this. And you can get to that 30 frames, but you have to also set up the camera in a certain way. Now, I'll go through some of those settings here, but I would definitely recommend watching a video by Mark Gaylor, who is a Sony image ambassador. He's out of Australia. He's a well-known photographer there and takes beautiful images. And he does a series of videos to help you set up your camera systems, variety of different Sony cameras. And yes, even though he's an ambassador for Sony, he understands how to set up the camera and he understands how to maximize the Alpha 1. And that's how I learned a lot of these settings as well. So we'll put a link to his video in the description below. But really what you want to do is when you program the camera, when you press on the shutter release button, you want to have it for release, not for autofocus, but for release. So the camera will automatically focus you don't have to program it to focus, it will automatically do so. But it's sort of like opening the floodgates for it to actually maximize up to 30 frames per second when you can do so. But I'll be honest with you, you're not going to be using this setting all the time. Because A, it's going to drain your battery. B, you're going to fill up your CF Express Type A cards really quickly because you can only max them out at 160 gigabytes per card versus Type B, which is up to 512 and even higher. So you're going to want to use this. Let's say it's the nitric oxide boost inside of the camera. Because when you set it to the high mode, which can go up to 20 frames per second, that's what most other cameras are doing out there anyway. Most people capturing sports or any sort of fast-moving subjects, 20 frames is more than adequate. But 30 frames or up to it is those minute moments where you need to capture just that split-second difference or a fraction of a second difference. That's where it's for. However, you will find that if you want to hold the shutter release button down, you'll get to about 5.5 seconds before the buffering starts kicking in. Now, it does clear relatively quickly, but it will slow down the shutter speed because I think it's also the speed of the cards. Case in point, the CF Express Type A cards only go up to about 700 megabytes for write speeds, right? As Type B is around 17 to 1800 or slightly, they're around that range. So it's almost double the speed as Type A. Now, I don't know why Sony didn't try to make the Type A as fast as Type B. I don't know if it's a size issue or what it was, but I think this camera would benefit from speeds from a Type B, but of course, if you can make it to a Type A size, that'd be ideal. Maybe they'll come out with that in the future, who knows? I mean, obviously this is a new camera system. you know, Sony released the Type A cards that came along with the A7S III, which is, you know, is more than adequate for this type of card. But when you're getting to this type of speed inside of this camera for photography, I think it would open the floodgates a little bit more, allow you to have a much more longer time to shoot with the shutter release holding down versus not. Having said that though, majority of the time I would shoot in 20 frames per second, and the buffering, there's no issues with that whatsoever. You can hold the shutter release down for a longer period of time before the buffering kicks in. And the buffering is very fast on this. It's faster than the A9 II, faster than the A9 or any other camera that Sony has on the market. So no issues at all with that. Now in terms of image quality out of this sensor, as I mentioned before, this redefines what a 50 megapixel full frame sensor can do. You know, Sony's been constantly improving their color science, and that's something always everybody complained about. And I'm shooting JPEG because unfortunately I can't read RAW files currently at this time, but the colors are beautiful. Then of course you can use acetone as well. Now you can use that for video, and also you can use it for photography. Just set it as a picture profile. You get a very nice cinematic look. The skin tones are beautiful. That magenta tone they used to get on Sony cameras is gone. It's gone. These files are very easy to edit. The colors are very easy as a base to edit. Sony has done a great job in their color science, and I was one that complained about the color science on older cameras. Not on this. Even friends of mine that tried this camera out with me over the past few days were like, wow, the colors are beautiful out of this thing. They are. Sony is, they got it, folks. They got it. That color issue is a thing of the past. Let's talk about the formats this camera can shoot. Of course, RAW. You got your extra fine for JPEG, but you also have HEIF files, 8-bit and 10-bit. Now, asterisk next to this, because I'm using a Mac, it can only read the 8-bit files. Like, even if you shoot in 10-bit, it can only read in an 8-bit. And Lightroom, nothing, nada, zilch. So, here's a little tip. If you get this camera at launch and you're trying to use it on your Mac, you can save them again as an HEIF file on the desktop in Apple's format. Then when you import them to Lightroom, Lightroom can see the image. Again, it's only 8-bit, it's not 10-bit, so we're gonna have to wait for the OSs to sort of update their systems to read 10-bit, but it's there. And then we also face this when Canon launched their HEI files as well. I mean, I know this is the future it's gonna take over JPEG in the future, but right now, a lot of computers can't read them. So just be wary of that. But I'll tell you what, extra fine JPEG, which I've been shooting the majority of the images you're seeing here in this video, is beautiful. I can edit them, there's decent enough dynamic range in them. Yeah, I could honestly say, and I'm not a person that shoots JPEG, I mainly shoot in RAW because I like that versatility. I like the dynamic range I have in a RAW file to really pull from highlights and shadows. But if I'm a working photographer, but I need a really clean, solid image, I would have no issues submitting a JPEG file for this. It's really, really good. Sharp, great detail, great dynamic range. As you can see, they're beautiful, and these images have been edited quite a bit. Let's talk about video for a moment. Now, video, I didn't tap in too much on this system because I'm more into the photography of things, of course, and we've got videos done by Gerald Undone and other people that are testing the 4K and 8K. We'll show you some 8K samples here. We'll actually record the end of this video in 8K so you can see what it looks like. But 8K reads relatively well on a computer. It's not as intensive as, let's say, Canon's variant is from the R5, which would shut down computers. But Sony's, you can easily edit versus Canon's, and it looks fantastic as well. You've got 4K 120, you've got 10-bit 422 in this. Great, now people are saying, but isn't the system pixel binning versus the A7S III? Honestly, folks, we have pixel peepers out there for photography, and we got pixel binning peepers out there for video. And the majority of you out there watching these videos on YouTube or watching them online, you're not gonna notice the difference. If you're a cinematographer and you're working with $100,000 plus camera systems, yeah, you know, you're projecting onto a movie screen, yes, these things matter a bit more. But for the majority of us, this camera system, what it can do with video, is way beyond what we need now, and probably in a year's time from now. It's future-proofed, and the video footage is beautiful. And then you can use that acetone and make it even more beautiful. So no issues at all with that. Plus you want S-Log2, S-Log3, it's all in there, HLG, all that bit. So no compromises whatsoever. And that's pretty much what this camera is like to use. It is, I mean, well, I didn't talk about low light, did I? I didn't talk about low light performance.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about low light performance. Ooh, okay. So, Normally with a higher resolution sensor, and people face this with the A7R4, you didn't want to push it beyond, 3200 ISO. 6400, it gets really noisy. I've taken images with this at 12,800 that are beautiful. Noise reduction's turned off, low light, very usable images. If you want to turn on the noise reduction inside the camera system for your JPEGs, it does a great job at reducing the noise. It looks even better. We are seeing the next generation of higher megapixel sensors that are going to be able to handle low light almost as good as a 24 megapixel sensor that we were previously used to using. You're now seeing that here in the Alpha 1. Again, 32,000, 100,000 plus, you're never going to use it at those levels, but you are going to get great low light performance photography as well as video. And there are videos out there that are comparing it to the A7S III, is saying this even does a better job in some aspects than the A7S III, and it's 50 megapixels. I don't know what to say. This camera just, every time you pick it up and use it, it impresses you with what it can do. And the more videos that come out with this over time, the more people use it, the more people really get their hands on it for a long-term review or usage, they're going to even discover more. But this camera has impressed me every single day I've had it. And I don't say that about a lot of cameras. As you know on this channel, I've been quite critical of Sony at times, but this is my favorite Sony camera I have ever used to date. Anyway, let's go into Lightroom now. Let's take a look at images and we'll show you some video footage as well from the Alpha 1. All right, guys, we're now in Lightroom. Take a look at images from the Sony Alpha 1 or A1. Now, my main goal with this camera, of course, was to try the animal photography in terms of, tracking my dog's eyes, cats, went to the zoo, went to the beach. I also did bird photography because I know that the tracking works well for people. We kind of know that by Sony. Even the A9, the A9 II, it's fantastic. And it's even better on the Alpha 1. But how does it work with animals? Because that's sort of the comparison the reviewers are putting it against in terms of the Canon R5 and the R6. So let's put it to the test. Okay, so first I want to show you in terms of animal performance, in terms of eye tracking. Now this is my dog Praha. We were at the beach. And look at this, it locks onto the eye. These are all shot in JPEG, mind you, because I wasn't able to shoot in RAW during this time because there's no converter. But look at this, it locked onto the eye, even through this fast action on this. Let me just give you some information on this. This is ISO 250, 102 millimeters, f4.5, 1/3200ths of a second, tack sharp. This is, and these dogs were really playing. You can see by the dirt right there. It was all over the place. I mean, these dogs were really playing and it just stuck on like glue. Here's another shot from that sequence right there. Let me go to this shot here. Now, this is a shot of her by the window. And one thing I did realize is that if you are quite close up to your subject, it will sometimes gravitate towards the eyelash. And it's not because it was too close. It was just sometimes it happens. I don't know why. But more times than not, I would say that it's grabbing on the iris. And here's a good example of that. This is the color locked onto the iris right there. No issues at all. By the way, this is shot in S-Cinetone. So I did shoot some photographs in S-Cinetone because I wanted to see what it looked like. I did convert it to black and white just for the dramatic effect of it. But let me show you what another image looks like in S-Cinetone with Praha as well. This was, yeah, look at that. Tack sharp. And this is before edit, after edit, before edit, after edit. S-Cinetone is the real deal. And I was shooting a lot of photographs in that because I just love the color palette. And I'll show you what it looks like on human skin in just a bit, because if you've never used it before, you might just stick with this picture profile and not want to deviate. Again, it only works with JPEGs, but one thing I found with the Alpha 1 is the JPEGs at extra fine at 50 megapixels are fantastic. And if you are in a pinch and you don't have time to really get into editing the raw files, the extra fine JPEG is more than adequate. Okay, let's look at some other dogs here in terms of action and photography. Here's this one shot here. I want to show you, this is really cropped in. And let me just show you the before edit and after edit. This is before, after, before. But let me show you the crop on this, because I really crop in a bit just to kind of capture this moment. Let's move on to the zoo, shall we? Because we like going to the zoo. I do a lot of zoo shots here because I love going there. Now here is a cheetah, and look at that. Give it a second to render because it is quite a large file. Tack sharp, ISO 1250, 300 millimeters at 5.6 1 over 250th of a second. And look at the detail we're seeing in the hair here with the eye on this camera is really good. I'm going to show you another sample at about 12,800 in just a second to prove my point. But at other cameras that are 45 to 50 megapixels at 1250 ISO, I'm seeing a lot more noise and grain than I'm seeing out of this Alpha 1. It's a testament to Sony's sensor technology, how much it's advanced. It's really, really impressive. And by the way, here's the before edit and here's after edit. Before edit, after edit. So highlighted the eyes, kind of really want to bring out the color and the fur a little bit. Let's look at this white tiger here for a second. Fantastic. ISO 2500, 400 millimeters, f6.3, 1 over 800ths of a second. And there you have it, folks. Tack sharp, locked onto the eye. So the eye tracking works really well for cat and dog families. So cats, tigers, lions, cheetahs, works great. Dogs, works great. No issues at all. Really happy with it. I mean, you could say, okay, if I want to nitpick, maybe a little bit more of the eyelashes in focus because it's really kind of hovering over the eye. But I mean, with a little bit of Photoshop, I can dial that in. But I'm really happy with that image. And if I print that up, no one's going to know the wiser that it barely missed. But look at this one. There we go. Look at that. Look at that detail right here through the fur right here. ISO 800, 400 millimeters, f6.3, 1 over 800ths of a second. This is sharp. This eye tracking blew me away. Okay, from the dog family, here we go. Look at this. Before edit, after edit. Before edit, after edit. Look at the detail here. Look at it. And by the way, that's cropped. Okay. Telling you, this sensor is no joke. I don't know what Sony did to it, their 50 megapixel sensor, but they've sort of redefined what you can do. Now let's show you 12,800 ISO. Okay, this is it. And I actually pushed up the exposure on this. Let me show you what it looked like before edit. Okay, 12,800 ISO. Look at this. Yeah, you're going to see some grain, you're going to see some noise. But come on, guys, I'm really punched in on this, and I'm seeing the detail. Look at this. If I go out normally, this image is more than usable. More than usable. I mean, I did a little bit of an edit to it. You know, if you want to play with the detail, of course, if I raise up the exposure, you're going to see more noise coming into it. But this is damn impressive for 12,800 on a 50 megapixel sensor. Let's go to bird photography, because this is probably, I wouldn't say it's the weakest link out of the autofocusing system, but it's the one that probably could use more improvement than anything else. Now, it does a relatively good job, but it does depend on the type of bird that you're shooting in terms of the, if it can see the eye, you know, if there's like a different color around the iris or that area, that's where it really does work well in that regard. Case in point, I do not know what the type of birds these are, so I do apologize in advance. This is really the first time I was really doing any sort of bird photography. But look at this. Capture the eyes right here, looking right at me. The bird was eating some food, so, yeah, looks fantastic. It locked onto that eye, no issues at all. It works relatively well also on profile shots for birds. So here's another shot here. I was shooting this with the 135 1.8. There you go. Pops into focus. Look at the detail out of this. And I'm really a bit away from this bird, right? Look at that. Look at this crop right here. And I'm getting that kind of detail. But it grabbed onto this eye because you can see the difference in color here, and of course the glare into the eyeball. So it did lock onto the eye, no issues at all. And it does work relatively well with birds in flight. Case in point, it did grab on over here. Got to give this a second to sort of render a second, because it's quite pixelated here. There we go. And if it doesn't grab on the eye, it will track the body. So, I mean, again, you know, bird photographers that use the A9, the A9 II, you know the drill. The eye tracking is just an added bonus for you, but I've seen some phenomenal bird photographers that can do without eye tracking, so it's there if you want it. And I think Sony will improve this over time. I'm guessing it's a firmware update or two away from being equivalent to the R5 in that regard, but I would say it's about 85 to 90% there, as I mentioned earlier in this review. It's really, really impressive. And this is the first time I've ever caught any sort of birds in flight. So I'm a novice at this. And I was kind of happy with myself overall. I was like, wow, actually, this is quite fun. I think I could get into this a little bit more. Yeah, look at that. Sharp. These JPEGs, a lot of information and detail on there. And now let's go to human skin tone here a second. Now, there's a picture of me that a friend of mine soon took of me, and this is with Sony tone. And let's just look at this real quick. JPEG. Now, you know that magenta cast we used to get with Sony cameras, which we were like, oh, it just really just kills our skin tone. It's gone. Look at this. This is natural. And I have not edited at this picture at all. So if I really want to bring this down a little bit, you know, and I want to start playing with it a bit, even I want to bump the temperature just a tad, look at this. It's a nice glow. I mean, I am really happy with this. And you know, that's one thing I did notice about the Alpha 1 images as a whole, even JPEGs, is that I found them to be very easy to edit. You know, certain color science and certain cameras, you've got to struggle to find that that sweet spot in your edit. But I found the Sony images out of this camera very, very easy to edit. And even give me 5 minutes with this, I could really do some wonders. I got to clean myself up a little bit here. But I mean, just in terms of skin tone, at least the base is there. And I was really happy with that. And we did take some other photos, which I don't have available here. They were on his SD card of some other people. And the skin tone is just beautiful. So I have to say that this color science issue a lot of people had with Sony cameras, and I did bring it up in previous reviews, it's a thing of the past. I think Sony has nailed it. The Alpha 1 has impressed me thoroughly. Look at these images. They are fantastic. I mean, the colors out of them, the detail, and these are JPEGs. These aren't even RAW files. Look at this lion right here. And this lion literally turned around for a split second, looked, fired off 30 frames, picked it up. The cheetah here. Look at this. It's beautiful. It's really, really amazing what this camera can do. To say that I was impressed, it might be a bit of an understatement. But anyway, let's go to my final thoughts and show you a little bit of 8K with the Alpha 1 right now. So we're here testing some 8K underneath this area at McRitchie Park because of the dynamic range from the sunlight into the shadows, to give you an idea of what this footage looks like. Now, we are shooting an Sony tone here at 10-bit 420 at 400 megabytes. So this is a pretty large file here. But we want to show you the image quality and, of course, the tracking. So we're using the 135 1.8 lens here on the Alpha 1. I'm just going to move around a little bit so you can actually see. I stay in focus no matter what. I mean, the 8K performs beautifully on this. And the colors, the Sony tone, of course, we've only seen these in the cinema cameras. This is the first time we're seeing it in an Alpha series camera. And I'm hearing that it's going to come to the A7S III soon. But man, this Sony tone is quite addicting. I was actually looking for a preset on Lightroom to mimic this because I like the way it looks. And once you grade it a little bit on top of the Sony tone, it is absolutely beautiful. But folks, we're at 8K, and this is how it's looking right now. Now, of course, when you export, you cannot export out as 8K yet. You can only export as 4K, but look at the detail. We'll even crop in on this to show you the amount of detail we can crop in on. So yeah, you can see really close up on me, or I can step back a little bit and see me here. So now we'll show you what 4K looks like out of the Alpha 1. So now we're shooting an all Intra 4K 10-bit 422 on this, and as you can tell, also a beautiful image. We are shooting with Sony tone as well, so you can compare the 8K to the 4K. Now, obviously 8K will be once in a while if you really need to crop in on your footage. 4K will probably be what you use the majority of the time because of size and because of ease of use for editing. While the 8K is still easier to edit than versus Canon's, it's still quite a bit for a system. So do take that in mind. Whenever you get into a camera system like this, you always do have to check to make sure that your computer system can handle what you want. A lot of people forget that. They invest in the camera, then they realize their laptop or their desktop isn't going to be able to handle the footage. So make sure you do check on that. But anyways, you can tell it's tracking to me, no issues at all with this. Yeah, eye tracking, all good. I can even run a bit if you want. We'll do a little run. Hold on, Kai Hong. I'm going to come through here. We're still on the 135 1.8. Here we go. We're gonna run. Okay, right? So my final thoughts on the Alpha 1 after using it for 5 days. So it's not a full review, of course. I'll probably get this camera in the future to do a more of a long-term review on it, but this is more of a first impressions, and I gotta say, if you couldn't already tell from this video, I'm really impressed. This is my favorite Sony camera to date. It just blew me away in terms of specs. Yeah, I mean, we could say that we wish the body was maybe updated in terms of the design, maybe, you know, it was a little bit larger, things like that, but the camera as a whole is on another level. And I don't think we've ever seen a full frame camera system like this yet on the market. And it's something that you really have to play with a lot more to understand its capabilities and the potential you have with this system. Now, there are some things to take note of course, that Sony does have some older lenses, like we mentioned, the 70-200 f2.8, the 85 1.4, the 24-70 f2.8. And while you can get third-party lenses that will cover those focal ranges, of course, you won't get the optimal speeds with the Alpha 1 with those lenses as of yet. Hopefully, Sony does update those lenses in the near future, and I think that's something that they can work on because they arguably have the best full-frame camera on the market now. All they need are lenses to match what this camera body can do. In terms of the CF Express Type A cards, I do hope that Sony comes out with larger capacity cards. 160 I feel is okay for consumers and hobbyists out there, but if you're a pro user and you're capturing a football game or a NBA game or, you know, the Olympics, you're going to need a higher capacity card. And also in terms of write speed, I feel that the Type A needs to be faster. I think that this will open the capabilities of this camera even more and also future-proof it. So I don't know if Sony will be doing this in the near future. I have no idea, but I'm hoping that they will. And seeing that Sony is out to win this full frame game, I think that will happen. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the Alpha 1. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Any questions you have on this camera that I wasn't able to answer in this video, let me know and I'll try to do my best to answer them for you. With that, stay safe, take care, and we'll see you very soon.